Okay, we are in Revelation chapter 20. Last week we covered a few of the figures of speech in Revelation chapter 20, just to make sure we understand that chapter 20 is not any different than the rest of the book. After all, the book starts in Revelation chapter 1, verses 1, that God would signify, he would communicate by signs, by figurative language, by symbolic actions and by symbolic visions. Well, the new versions will take out the word signify and put the word communicate. Well, Acts is communication, Matthew is communication, but Revelation is signify, to sign I fied. So he would use figures of speech in order to put across what he's talking about, thus the apocalypse. We took notice of a few of those. We kind of honed in on the bottomless pit. If it's bottomless, then it has to be a figure of speech. It cannot be a literal bottomless going on throughout eternity, throughout heaven, throughout the heavens of heavens, and whoever it might be. So it's obviously a figure of speech. We honed in a little bit on chapter 20, verse 8, where he talked about the deception of the nations with Gog and Magog. Since the first century and before, there has been no country called Gog and Magog. So even if there wasn't before or after, it's still a figure of speech, but be that as it may, that's a part of it. We took notice that they would gather together against the camp and against the city of God. Well, is it a camp or is it a city? Well, both of them are figures of speech that indicate God's people. And the gathering together is a figure of speech because you have Gog and Magog being the size of the sands of the sea, and you have the seed of Abraham being the size of the sands of the sea. So if you have the children of Abraham, and if you have the nations, and all of them are the sands of the sea, and you're gathering around Jerusalem, you're going to run into the Mediterranean Ocean and a few other oceans in order to gather that number of people around the city. Obviously, then, it's a figure of speech. We also took notice of the four corners of the earth. As one young lady said, the earth is round, therefore there are no four corners. Well, it's a figure of speech that all tells us some things concerning the fact that Revelation chapter 20 has a number of figures of speech. Before we get into one or two other items, I want to call your attention to a major issue with the modern versions. Whenever you whenever you look at verse 4, the last phrase says, they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Now, when you look at the American Standard, the King James, and the New King James, you're going to read, they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. It's vitally important to recognize that the verb tense of lived is the same verb tense of reigned. They lived as long as they reigned as long as they lived. They didn't, as the new versions say, come to life and reign. That's two different verbs. But the modern versions have to do that to fulfill the doctrines that they try to teach. What John is saying is they lived and reigned the same amount of time. Well, what was that amount of time? Doesn't say. And that's an important point. Doesn't say when they began to live. It doesn't say when they began to reign. It doesn't say when they end either. It just says during this 1,000 years, they lived and reigned. Important point. Your New American Standard Bible, your New International Bible, your English Standard Version, they will point out and say they came to life and reigned, which is incorrect. Notice also that 4 and 5, you have in verse 5, as we continue on reading, the rest of the dead live not until the 1,000 years should be finished. That's the American Standard. You will have noticed that if you're reading a King James, that it says lived again. The word again is in some of the Greek text. Should it be or should it not be? There are reasonings as to why it should be. There are reasoning as to why it should not be. Personally, I don't think it changes what I see as the verse being, as what's being said. However, the idea of lived again, people hang on to that to say, see, they're resurrected from the dead. No, not if you understand who verse 5 is talking about. And again, they lived, verse 5, they live not. That's really the comparison to the two. And you'll take notice that in the King James, I think it's in the King James, you have in verse 5, but the rest live not. So you have that minor, that mild contrast from the D that is in there, day, D. Now, whenever you look at verse 5, you see this little nuance, if you please. And here we're going to bring it out. It's in other verses, but if I'm using the NIV, which is being used by the majority of the people to teach the book of Revelation, then it's kind of like Jesus would use the Septuagint. He knows people use it, so he would call attention to what it says because it's going to point something out that's important, that he is not going to argue about whether the text says this or says that. He's just going to point out to them, look, here's what you're reading. So I would say to those who read the NIV, here's what you're reading. In verse 5, you have a parenthetical statement. It starts with the rest, and it ends with were ended. Then it says, this is the first resurrection. Why are you saying all that wrong? Because of this. When it ends by saying, and this is not parenthetical, this is the first resurrection, it does not refer to the parenthetical statement. But that's also in the text. Well, what does this is the first resurrection go with? It goes with the last part of verse 4. They lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Again, there are those who make a distinction that they ought not to make. And so I'm using these little pieces of information to help us to understand that they ought not to be there. Best way to put it. Calling your attention to another issue before we get into some of the things that are stated. No, let's go ahead and do this. Let me point out to you that last week what we did was we took notice of the main thing about chapter 20. And it's really important as to what the main thing is, so we repeat it today. Chapter 20 is not a chapter on 1,000-year earthly reign of Christ. The theme of Revelation chapter 20 follows what John has been saying. John has been saying, Revelation 17 and 18, the defeat of the harlot. John had just said, Revelation 19, the defeat of the beast, plural. That would be Rome, that would be Nero, that would be pagan worship. Defeat of those. Those are the agents of Satan. Revelation chapter 20 is a discussion of the defeat of Satan. Satan is behind all deception. He uses agents. John covered the idea of his agents having lost, been defeated. Now he covers the point that Satan, by that very act, he also is defeated. So, verse 2, the angel laid hold of Satan, the dragon, which shows you that it's a figure of speech, and bound him for 1,000 years. That's a figure of speech. What does it mean? Verse 3, so that he should deceive the nations no more for the 1,000 years. So he's bound for 1,000 years. What does that mean? He can deceive the nations no more. The deceiving of the nations is diminished. It's diminished. It's not gone. The context tells you that. What do you mean? Revelation chapter 12 and 13 and 17 and 18 has told you and me, readers, that the deceivers would be the harlot. The deceivers would be the beast. The deceivers would be paganism, the land beast, the sea beast, and the harlot. They're gone. That's the binding of Satan. That's what has bound him up. He can't exercise what he's been exercising. The 1,000 years, again, is a figure of speech, not to indicate 1,000 years, nor does it indicate a long period of time. It actually indicates a victorious vindication of God's people. And so you have the binding of Satan within the text, and you'll take notice that this is for 1,000 years. Now, in verse 7, we pointed out, and the 1,000 years expired, finished, Satan shall be loosed out of the abyss, the prison. Okay. Here's one of the most important concepts to grasp as I see it in Revelation 20. Satan was deceiving the nations through his agents, but that was diminished. So he was bound. That changed things. He deceived the nations no longer. Why? Because his agents are bound. Now watch. He's loosed. They're no longer diminished. Why? Because now Gog and Magog, his new agents, have gained strength and power, and they have gone into the world to deceive the nations. Are there any questions before we go any further? That's a very quick summary. Well, maybe it's a long summary of last week. Can you turn that heater off? There are a number of things that I'm trying to figure out which one to go over first. Well, you should have figured that out before the class began. There's just too many to figure out. As you have taken notice, Satan is free. He's bound. He's loosed. And this loosing, I think I'll put this in before we go any further. Let me compare, and David may hold this view, and he can correct me on any of it that he would like to, but it's as I recall it. Whenever you read Revelation chapter 20, 4 through 6, and you see the binding of Satan, and you see them on thrones, and you see they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years, those who are in the churches of Christ have taught a millennial, millennial meaning 1,000. And so the is a Greek privative, which says not so, not 1,000. And so the members of the church, gospel preachers over the centuries, over the years, over the decades, have taught the view that the 1,000 years is the time frame of Christianity. We are now in the 1,000 years. That's their concept. That 1,000 years began in the first century. Let me read to you their foundation. You keep saying theirs, Ron. Don't you hold that view? No, my view is slightly different. Satan was bound at the cross. That's their view. Here's their verses. John 12:31. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. See, he's cast out and into the prison or the abyss. That's their point. Hebrews 2:14 is another passage they use. That through death he, Christ, might bring to naught him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. See, he no longer has that power. And that's what is meant by the binding of Satan. I am pointing out what brethren usually teach. Colossians 2:15, having despoiled the principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. And then Matthew 12:28. Some of these passages, by the way, we use, but we use them to say a principle. They are using them in order to give you a time frame. I use them to give a principle. They're using them to give a time frame. But if by the Spirit of God I cast out demons, then is the kingdom of God come unto you. Matthew 12:28. Therefore, their claim, these texts establish that Satan was bound, cast out, and despoiled at Christ's first coming, specifically at the cross and the resurrection. That's the amillennial view. Therefore, the 1,000 years began at the cross and the resurrection to a degree. And the 1,000 years will last throughout all Christianity. The 1,000 years reflects Christianity, the totality of it. So far, Christianity has been 2,000 years. If it goes another 1,000 years, then the 1,000-year reign, Revelation 20, will equal 3,000 years. So they believe it's a figure of speech. They just say that it's the situation with the years of Christianity. I mentioned to you that one of the problems that arose in my mind that caused an issue with that view, and here it is. That's the loosing problem. Verse 7 says that after the 1,000 years are finished, expired, after Christianity is expired according to their definition of the 1,000 years, then Satan is loosed. That means then, since he's loosed, that's the opposite of the binding. What bound him? The cross and the resurrection, and the power of the cross and the resurrection. Well, he's loosed. What does that mean? That means that it no longer has effect. The cross is a completed, permanent, unrepeatable act. But the text says he must be loosed. Their framework cannot supply coherent ground for the loosing without contradicting the permanence of what the cross has accomplished. The purpose of the cross and what it has accomplished, in Ron's thinking, is the destruction of Satan and sin and the forgiveness of sins and that power that goes along with all of that. That will last until Christ comes again, period. So the loosing for a little season at the end of the 1,000 years gives me a problem. I would think it would give them a problem because they have him being bound by the cross and he gets loose. Here's a major distinction, my view. Ron, what is the 1,000 years according to what you think? I think the 1,000 years is the binding of Satan. and it didn't last very long. Well, why does it say 1,000 years? 1,000 years is because of what it did, not because of how long it did. I know that becomes confusing. I have no doubt about that at all. But the 1,000 years is not literal. It's a figure of speech that indicates that there is a overcoming of Satan. How? Not by the cross. Yes, yes. The cross does have something to do with it, but not in the sense that my brethren, the all-millennial, thinks that it does. The binding of Satan is the destruction of those who are deceiving the nations. That's the binding of Satan. That's what the text says. That occurred in the first century. That he could deceive the nations no longer. But after the 1,000 years, and that was a short period of time as far as 1,000 years is concerned, that he was able to no longer deceive the nations, that lasted until new agents popped up and they began deceiving the nations again. Well, it says that it shall be for a short period, a short season, a short time. It's not time. The 1,000 years is not about time. The loose for a short season is not about time. Now, right here, I would go into a comparison, but I'm not going to. If you want to ask me about it, I will, and we'll go into it next week. But let me know after the class is over. We'll go into that comparison as to how there can be a time and it not be a long and short. It's simply a matter of time, worthiness, and quality as a comparison. What? Be glad to go over it. Therefore, Christ came to this earth. He lived, he preached, and he lived and preached without sin. He never committed a transgression against anyone. And everything he did was for the love of the souls of mankind. And so when he died on the cross of Calvary, that was predicted. That was predicted in Genesis chapter 3. That was predicted in the book of Psalms. That was predicted in Isaiah. You read Psalm 22 and you read Isaiah 53, and you have to come to the conclusion that God knew that Jesus was going to die, and he was going to die on a cross. In Psalm 22, 1000 BC, they had no crosses to die on. But that was predicted anyway, that manner of death. 333 prophecies of the coming of Christ and his work and what he did. And 24 of those and more are fulfilled within a 24-hour period of his crucifixion. So Christ would come to this earth and he would die on the cross of Calvary for mankind. He would be resurrected. He would establish the church. And by doing all of that, he would show mankind truth, the word of the truth of the gospel, Colossians chapter 1. And by knowing the truth shall set you free, John chapter 8. And those people were free from their sins, not from their slavery of mankind. And so he would bind Satan by the preaching and the teaching and the power of the gospel. And by physically doing some damage to the agents that would try to hinder, obstruct the gospel of Christ, deception. And he would destroy them, remove them, as, by the way, with Jerusalem that he said he was going to do. However, Satan has and has had other agents that would deceive mankind, and that other agent is found in Revelation chapter 20, but it happened shortly after Satan was bound. It happened shortly after after Judaism was destroyed and after Nero was destroyed. Not a long time. So in the first century, the binding, the 1,000 years of Satan, is a short period near 70 AD. And the loosing of Satan is around 70 AD, 90 AD, because Domitian came on the scene and was deceiving the nations again and persecuting them. And Domitian was as much an agent as was Nero, but not to the intensity and the hatred that Nero was, nor the stupidity of Nero. Satan is loosed. Oh, you're saying Satan is loose throughout time. I'm saying that it's a figure. I know it's not easy. So I'm trying to articulate what I'm trying to point out. That it's simply the idea, the binding of Satan for 1,000 years is simply the defeat of Satan and the elevation of Christianity. And that's what you're going to have throughout time. You're going to have in various places the defeat of Satan and the increase of the gospel and the power of the gospel to convert mankind. And then somebody's going to come along and put their thumb on that, but it's going to rise over here. And that's going to continue throughout time. It's an event. The event is deception of mankind. The event is no longer deceiving mankind. The event is deceiving again mankind. Ron, does Revelation have anything to do with eternity or with the rest of time? I guess is a better way to put that. Yes. Verse 7, Revelation 20 and 7. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, shall go out to deceive the nations which are in four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, gather them together to battle, the number of whom is the sand of the sea. That's a full, basic, encompassing, universal statement throughout the time of mankind. That's what you're going to see over and over and over again in a variety of places. Gog and Magog, the nations of the world, will gather themselves against Christianity. And they'll do so by trying to deceive. By the way, they'll also do so by persecution, but it's deception is what causes the problem. Deception is what gets in the way of people hearing the gospel of Christ. And so they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, verse 9, fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. That's not a literal devouring. That's simply the fact that they will be defeated. So down through time, from the first century, you're going to have this ebb and flow in a variety of places, a variety of times. A number of times it's going to occur in a number of different places. And it's going to occur throughout time. Earth time. Well, Ron, there's no time after Earth. I know, but I wanted to make sure we understood that. Any questions? Any confusion? Revelation 20, verse 4. Revelation 20, verse 4 is a three-passage discussion of that which would be beneficial to the child of God in the first century who is going through all of this. God has done it repeatedly, time and time again, throughout the book of Revelation to give encouragement to the brethren who are going through a number of these things. So he says, John says, I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus. What I want you to see is the possibility of at least two different groups. the possibility of at least two different groups. Group number one, I saw thrones. I saw they sat upon the thrones. I saw them when they did the sitting to a degree. I saw judgment was given to them. My suggestion to you, again, I would not press this, but I would suggest it very strongly to you, that that's probably talking about the apostles. Very quickly, if you want me to, you can slow me down, David, if you want to raise your hand and say, slow down. In Revelation chapter 19, verse 4, you have the 4 and 20 elders. In Revelation 4 and Revelation chapter 5, they are on thrones, and we talked about them being the apostles. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 28, Jesus told the apostles this: Verily I say unto you, that ye who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So this passage declares that they shall sit on 12 tribes, 12 thrones. When you look back in the Old Testament and we called attention to the fact that the 24 elders included the 12 heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. Notice in Numbers chapter 1, 4, and 5, and with you there shall be a man of every tribe, every one of his father's house, and these are the names of the men that stand with you. Verse 16, these are they that are called of the congregation, the princes of the tribes of their fathers. They are the heads of the thousands of Israel. So being the heads, they were the judges, the prime judge, and the prime head. So the apostles were given thrones of power. What power? It's important to recognize that the apostles were given thrones of power, and the thrones of power was to loose and to bind. Matthew 16:18, I will give thee the keys of the kingdom, and whatsoever you shall loose shall be loosed in heaven, whatsoever you shall bind shall be bound in heaven. Now, herein, some of the new versions may put the Greek tense in a little clearer sense. I'll just give you the point that's being made, and it's this. Jesus is promising to Peter, and in Matthew 18:18, he promises to the rest of the apostles, promises this: whatever is bound in heaven, you will bind on earth. Whatever is loosed in heaven, you will loose on earth. You're not going to make new laws. You're going to pass those laws on. The Constitution of God is already set. You are judges, you are justices to administer, to present as ambassadors and as judges and as those who are on thrones to present it to the rest of the world. That's the part of the 12. So I think maybe Revelation 20, verse 4, thrones, they sat upon them, judgment was given unto them, could very likely be the apostles, and it's more than likely they are. Now you have a second group. I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Christ. You need to underline souls. I saw their spirits. I didn't see their beheaded bodies. I saw their souls. I saw the souls of them who, please listen to the description, that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus. They were preaching in the first century and they died because of it. That's what he just said. He continues, and for the word of God, he continues, and which had not worshiped the beast, first century, and neither his image neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. First century. And they lived and reigned with Christ. As you're looking at the description, turn with me, please, to Revelation 13, verse 11. You may certainly hold your finger in Revelation chapter 20 and see the description as you go along if you need a remembrance of it, a reminder of it, because Revelation 13 is reminding you of it. Or Revelation 20 is reminding you of Revelation 13. I beheld, verse 11, another beast coming up out of the earth. That's the land beast. That would be paganism. And he had two horns like unto a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Verse 12, and he causeth the earth, I skipped a little, and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. Revelation 20. The souls of them that were beheaded did not worship the beast, but that's what was given unto the earth beast. Verse 14. And he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast. Miracles would be the word signs, not miracles, not supernatural. Signs. You can have a sign without it being miraculous. He did what? He deceived. It's what we've been saying. Saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast. Revelation 20. Same thing. Skipping down to verse 16. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Revelation 20. There is no difference in what they're trying to do, Revelation 13, and what was not accomplished with the souls that are under the souls that are beheaded. Looking at Revelation 6, verse 9. Revelation 6, 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of them that had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. Revelation 20. So you can recognize what was going on. They that were under the altar cried out and said, How long, O Lord, how long? Avenge us our blood. Verse 11. There was given to each one of them a white robe, and said unto them that they should rest yet for a little time until their fellow servants also and their brethren who should be killed even as they were should have fulfilled their course. More are going to die, is what he just said. Revelation 6, Revelation 13 is telling you who Revelation chapter 20, the souls that are beheaded, are. The distinction, look at this. The distinction is this. Revelation 6, they're under the altar. Revelation 20, they lived and reigned. They're winning. They're winning. And that's the point of verses 4, 5, and 6. Those on the other side, they live not. Verse 5. We went into a little bit of that a couple of weeks ago. If we had more time, we'd go into it again now. They live not. The passage is not discussing bodily resurrections. A first bodily resurrection, a second bodily resurrection, a third bodily resurrection. It's discussing the rising up of the power of the gospel in the contrast of the defeat of Satan. And it's called the first resurrection. The fact that he called it the first resurrection shows you that it's a figure of speech. The fact that he said they lived and reigned 1,000 years and the rest of the dead live not shows you it's a figure of speech. It's not a literal reigning on the earth, which is another lesson that we can give concerning premillennialism, postmillennialism, and all the other millennialisms that say that Christ is coming again to establish a kingdom, an earthly kingdom in Jerusalem, set up a literal throne of David in Jerusalem, and rule and reign over the world from Jerusalem. That's not at all what's in the text. You do not have an earthly reign of Christ in Revelation 20. You do not have earthly people in Revelation chapter 20, verses 4 and 5 of the reign. They're dead and they're reigning. I stop there. I do appreciate your attention. We shall cover some other things, especially if you send me any notes that would suggest some specifics you would like to address.